There's a type of bridge, the suspension kind, where the cables don't originate at the towers. They originate underground, buried in massive concrete anchorages sunk deep into the earth on either end. The towers are the thing you see. The towers are the thing that looks like structure. But if you pull the towers out and leave the anchorages in place, the deck stays up. Pull the anchorages and everything falls, regardless of how beautiful the towers are. I want you to think about that for a moment. Not because it's a nice image, because it's your body. And the anchorage, the buried foundation point that the whole tensional system roots into, is the sole of your foot. Where this connects to your smile lines is not obvious. I understand that. When I first encountered the research that points in this direction, I was skeptical in the way I think any careful clinician should be skeptical. The claim sounds too neat. The distance between feet and face, too great. Feet and smile lines feel like they belong to different conversations. And yet the anatomy keeps insisting otherwise. The cables in this particular bridge are real, they're named, and they've been mapped. So before you look at your face in the mirror today and see what you usually see there, press your heel into the floor, just gently. Notice whether you can feel anything shift above your ankle. We'll come back to what that feeling means. The conventional explanation for the lines that deepen around the mouth and eyes as we age is a good one. It holds up. Collagen production slows after the mid-30s and continues to slow. The scaffolding that keeps skin plump and resilient becomes less dense. Fat pads in the face descend under gravity. The malar fat pad, which gives the cheek its fullness in youth, migrates downward over decades. Elastin fibers lose their spring. These are real processes, documented extensively, and the cosmetic industry is built on interventions that address exactly these changes. Retinoids, hyaluronic fillers, radiofrequency treatments, they work within this model, and they work reasonably well because the model they're working within is genuinely true. The question I've been sitting with, and it's the question that pulled me into this particular investigation, is whether that model is complete, whether collagen and gravity and volume are the full story, or whether there is another input that the conventional model hasn't accounted for. An input that starts considerably further from the face than most people would expect. Let me take you into an anatomy lab for a moment. When Thomas Myers sat down to map what he called the anatomy trains, the continuous myofascial chains that run through the body, he was building on dissection work that had been done in anatomy theaters for centuries, but interpreted in a new way. Instead of looking at muscles as isolated units with origins and insertions, Myers traced the connective tissue envelopes, the fascial wrappings, and found that they don't stop at muscle boundaries. They continue, they link. They form what he described as lines of pull that span the entire body. The one that concerns us today is called the superficial front line. And here is where the investigative narrator in me has to be careful to distinguish between what is solidly established and what the evidence implies but hasn't yet proven by direct study in the specific way you might want. What is solidly established? The superficial front line is a named, dissectable, anatomically confirmed myofascial chain. It runs, and I want to map this with you, starting from the floor and going up because the direction matters. From the dorsal surface of the toes and the top of the foot, up through the anterior shin via the tibialis anterior, into the quadriceps fascia, through the rectus abdominis and its sheath, over the sternal attachments, up through the sternocleidomastoid on either side of the neck, into the fascia of the scalp, and terminating in what's called the galea aponeurotica, the fibrous sheet that covers the top and front of the skull, from which the frontalis muscle, the muscle responsible for forehead expression, directly originates. Before I go further along the chain, I should give you the piece that makes all of this meaningful. The piece is this: the chain is continuous in a way that is not merely anatomical metaphor. Dr. Carla Stecco at the University of Padua, whose cadaveric dissection work on fascia has probably done more to advance our understanding of connected tissue mechanics than any other single research program in the last 2 decades, demonstrated in her dissections that fascial tissue transmits mechanical load across anatomical boundaries that we previously considered separate. The sheet doesn't just exist, it conducts. When you apply tension at one point in a fascial system, that tension propagates through the sheet with diminishing but measurable amplitude to structures connected through the same tissue. Paul Huijing, whose work on myofascial force transmission was published across multiple papers in the Journal of Biomechanics, quantified something that anatomists had suspected but not measured. Forces applied to muscle tissue are transmitted to adjacent fascial compartments at levels that are not trivial. Not the full force, some attenuates at each transition, but enough that the communication across the system is real and not negligible. Here's the objection I know you're building. The face is very far from the foot. The distance is substantial. Whatever tension exists at the plantar surface, surely it attenuates to nothing before it reaches anything as delicate as the facial soft tissue. It's a reasonable objection. I held it too. Here's what it doesn't account for. The superficial front line doesn't just connect foot to face. It's under resting tension. Every fascial chain in your body maintains what anatomists call a baseline tone, a pre-tension, the way guitar strings maintain tension even when no one is playing them. The chain doesn't wait for you to move before it becomes relevant. It's always doing something. And what it's doing is governed, in significant part, by what's happening at its anchor points. The plantar fascia, the thick band of connective tissue that runs along the sole of your foot, from the heel bone to the base of the toes, is one of the most densely loaded fascial structures in the body. It handles the full mechanical weight of your body with every step. But more relevant to what we're discussing, it maintains its baseline tension even when you're seated, even when you're standing still. The intrinsic muscles of the foot in the plantar fascia itself hold a resting posture. And in most adults who spend significant time in supportive footwear, and even more time seated, that resting posture has drifted toward what I'd call, the word contraction is slightly off here. It's more specific than that, a gripping pattern. A habitual shortening of the plantar structures that happens below the threshold of your awareness because it produces no pain and demands no attention. This gripping pattern isn't dramatic. You won't feel it if I ask you to notice your feet right now. But if you spent 20 or 30 years in shoes that limit the natural spread of the foot, if you spent those same decades primarily seated on surfaces that keep the foot passively positioned, the plantar fascia has adapted. It has shortened toward its new normal. And because it's the anchor of the superficial front line, that shortening introduces a baseline tension that the rest of the chain inherits. I want to be honest about where the evidence becomes mechanistic inference rather than direct clinical measurement. There are no large-scale prospective studies that follow subjects for 20 years, measure plantar fascia tone, and correlate it with nasolabial fold depth. That study hasn't been done. What we have instead is the convergence of the established anatomy of the superficial front line, the confirmed mechanics of fascial force transmission from Stecco and Huijing, the well-documented phenomenon of distal tension affecting proximal structures in musculoskeletal medicine, and the clinical observation that interventions targeting plantar mobility produce effects that appear to propagate upward through the chain in ways that purely local mechanics don't explain. The chain of evidence is strong, even where the chain of studies is short. And there is something almost tender about this realization, if you let it land. The lines that have deepened around your mouth and eyes, lines you've probably attributed to collagen, to genetics, to the simple passage of time, may be, in part, the face of your feet. The record of a foundation that's been pulling, quietly, for years. That's not a comfortable thought, but it's also not a hopeless one. Because the sole of the foot is the one place in this entire system where you can intervene directly, specifically, and with almost no barrier to entry. Someone who came to understand this shifted the way they looked in the mirror. Not immediately. The shift in understanding came first, weeks before anything visible changed. The before state. Standing in a bathroom at some point in the morning, looking at the grooves beside the mouth, the descent of the cheek, and reading those features as evidence of a verdict. This is what 50-something looks like. This is inheritance. This is done. The after state. Looking at the same face and seeing, instead of a verdict, a tension pattern. Seeing the terminus of a chain. Seeing the place where years of a particular foot position had arrived. The lines didn't disappear, but their meaning changed. And with the meaning, the possibility changed. The face went from something that was happening to someone to something that could be, at least partly, specifically, not magically, addressed at its source. That partial improvement matters. I want to be clear. We are not discussing the reversal of intrinsic aging processes. Collagen loss is real. The conventional model is correct. What we're discussing is one additional input, a mechanical one, a structural one, that has been overlooked because it originates somewhere that seems irrelevant. The minimum effective intervention for this particular input is one protocol, one point of entry into the system, and it takes 60 seconds. Here's the setup, and the setup matters because the position determines what the technique accomplishes. You're seated, shoes and socks off. Cross your right foot over your left knee so the sole faces you. You're looking at the bottom of your foot. There are 3 zones I want you to address, and I'll give you the order after I explain why the order matters. Actually, let me start with the zones first, and then give you the sequencing rationale, because the zones are easier to locate before you're thinking about sequence. Zone 1 is the heel junction, the point where the heel bone meets the plantar fascia. You'll feel a slight ridge there, a transition from the hard pad of the heel to softer tissue. Zone 2 is midfoot, the arch, roughly centered. Zone 3 is the metatarsal heads, the ball of the foot, just behind the toes. Now the sequence. Start at zone 1. The heel junction is the proximal anchor of the plantar fascia, the place where the chain begins. Releasing here first creates slack that the rest of the press can work with. Use your thumb, the pad, not the tip. Apply steady, moderate pressure, not painful. This should feel like reaching into deep tissue, not like a bruise. Then, and this is the part that seems small, but changes the mechanical equation considerably, extend your toes, actively. Point them gently back towards your shin. You're doing 2 things simultaneously, compressing the tissue from below and lengthening the chain from above. Hold that position through 3 slow breaths. What you may notice during those 3 breaths, a sensation of something releasing not at the heel, but higher. Some people feel it at the shin, some at the anterior thigh. Some notice a subtle shift in the jaw. Some notice nothing during the press and notice the after effect only when they stand up. All of these are within the range of what the anatomy predicts. The chain is long, and where you perceive the release depends on where your particular tension pattern is most pronounced. Move to zone 2 after the 3 breaths. Same pressure, same toe extension, same 3 breaths. Then zone 3, 30 seconds total. Repeat on the left foot. That's the complete protocol. 60 seconds per foot, 120 seconds for both. The optimal trigger, the implementation detail that makes a practice stick rather than remain a good intention, is to attach it to something you already do every morning. For most people, the most reliable anchor is the moment before shoes go on. Feet are bare, you're seated, the context is already correct. The press becomes the last barefoot action before the foot disappears into footwear for the day. What you're measuring, if you want to evaluate this honestly, rather than take my word for it, is simple. Photograph your nasolabial folds, the creases beside the mouth, in the same lighting, same distance, same neutral expression, at the same time of day. Do this at baseline. Do it again at 14 days. You're not measuring with a ruler. You're asking a straightforward question. Is there a visible difference in the resting depth of those creases? The 14-day mark is not arbitrary. Fascial tissue responds to sustained mechanical input over weeks, not days. The first few days of any soft tissue intervention are largely neurological, the nervous system adjusting its baseline tone in response to new input. The structural changes, the actual changes in tissue length and compliance, begin to accumulate after that initial neurological shift. 14 days puts you past the neurological window and into the structural one. If you see no change at 14 days, that is also information. It tells you either that the protocol isn't adequate for your particular pattern, that the plantar to fascial link isn't a significant contributor to your specific lines, or that the baseline tension in your chain is more established than 60 seconds per day can address. None of these outcomes make the anatomy less real. They make your individual response to this intervention legible. And that's the larger question this whole investigation keeps coming back to. Not, does this work? The mechanism is sound enough that some version of it works for most people who commit to it consistently. The larger question is whether we've been treating facial aging as a surface phenomenon when it's also a structural one. Whether the lines on the face are receiving tension from below the face, from far below the face, from the contact point between the body and the floor. The conventional model says, address what you can see. The anatomical evidence says, trace the cables back to where they're anchored. Both of these are true. That's the synthesis I want you to carry. Not that one model defeats the other, that they're describing different inputs to the same phenomenon, and you now have access to an input that most people working on facial aging aren't considering. The cables run from the ground up. They always have. You're just meeting them where they start. If this channel has been a useful part of how you think about your body, if the investigation has been worth following, staying close is easy. There's no shortage of anatomy left to trace.